Hi, it's Homay from Spitfire Audio, and I'm here with Solomon Gray, electronic duo from London, who are also composers. And you guys have just played Clouds for us, which is the theme tune from the TV series called The Last Post. But just briefly, just before we go into that, could you just give me a summary of how you guys met and how it all started, and maybe a little bit of the background of your music?
You go for it. We met nearly 20 years ago, which makes us feel very old. We actually met playing covers, so pretty different from what we've just done.
Like a 10-piece kind of funk and soul covers band.
Which is really, really good fun. I was a student, Joe was still at school. We got to go to every university ball party for free, so it was great. But I guess out of all the people in the band, the two of us had ambitions to do more than just play covers. So yeah, after not too long, we started writing stuff, just messing about, really.
Has it really been 20 years?
Nearly, yeah.
It's like that, just happened like that.
Yeah. So so that was then, and we've always made music together since that time. Sort of on and off with different projects. But I guess Solomon Gray is the first one that we came to it and it turned into something serious that, ended up being our jobs, so, yeah.
Yeah, when we first got together, it was like the late 90s, so I think we were just kind of trying to write hip-hop and drum and bass, and
whatever we thought was
whatever we thought. Tom lived in the cellar somewhere in Oxford, and we
Not
went...
like in a basement flat, not in an
flat.
actual cellar.
In an actual cellar. And yeah, we just started writing anything at first, and probably about maybe a few years ago anyway, we went off and started the project Solomon Gray. And yeah, I think it kind of, the first few years, I mean, obviously it sounds like such a long time, but the first few years we were just learning and making every mistake in the book, and I mean, we still are, but then we disappeared for a bit and kind of stopped doing anything and just really, really worked on what we wanted to do and the sound that we wanted to create, and that was the first album, really. That was, that took a long time to kind of get right without anyone else interfering, or for us anyway, and then learn from a whole load of new mistakes.
Yeah, and you look at all these 18, 20-year-olds who are making incredible music and are so mature at that age, and I just don't, I wasn't that person. It took me until a bit later to really know what I wanted to do, and, yeah.
So how did you then make the move from the electronic side to soundtrack?
So when we write, we normally work with a lot of imagery and a kind of like a collage of ideas, and so when we were writing the album, even some of those tracks used strings and more kind of cinematic sounds. And I mean, within the collage was even films and things like that. So we were definitely writing the mode was kind of soundtrack anyway. It was more maybe in the framework of pop, but it was still had a lot of those kind of ideas behind it. The studio just had like loads of paper, like putting loads of different coloured paper up and drawing and writing ideas, and then putting down maybe inspiration and things that we wanted to be inspired by, and so from that, I think we kind of had a few tracks on the first album, or a few things that we did as side projects that were kind of that world a lot more, and because it was such a visual way of writing those kind of tracks, I think, luckily, some other people came along and asked us to write that kind of music a bit more, and we had the story. We had started writing a lot of Solomon Gray stuff on the coast of Ireland, and we ended up doing a project with Tourism Ireland where we wrote an EP based on the North Atlantic Way, like one of the longest coastal roads in the world, and it was the first time that we hadn't been constrained with the ideas of trying to be a pop act and felt a little bit more free to write instrumentals and a bigger landscape maybe, and be a little bit, afford to be a little bit bolder with what we were doing. And, you know, from that kind of basis of writing a soundtrack for a place and our experience as we travelled up that road, and we kind of, I think, you know, we were really lucky that Johnny Campbell, a director who we ended up meeting, was just really into the sound that we'd created on that record, and was interested in the way that we'd formed that sound and the way that we'd ended up with, you know, that EP basically. And so we ended up doing a TV show. Yeah.
For the live setup that you have for As Solomon Gray, can you give like an overview of what kind of instrumentation you use for that? And is there a difference when you write for Solomon Gray or when you actually write then for the soundtrack?
I mean, I think there was when we started. Like we were, as Jay says, we were doing our more, I guess, pop song-focused writing, and then we were doing our soundtrack writing. And I think as time went on, they got closer and closer. And we started to use some things that are in the soundtrack palette in our pop writing. And maybe even vice versa, actually, we'd kind of cross over. So I think for this latest album and this latest show, we've really embraced that the two worlds don't have to be different. They're kind of, you know, the album, the pop album we've made is a soundtrack of sorts, and it definitely uses that, I guess, the techniques and the textures that we've used in soundtracks, and, live strings, lots of atmospherics, lots of recorded found sounds that form that kind of atmospheric backbone of tracks. And so I think, yeah, the live show we're doing here, just we've tried our best to sort of translate that into the live environment and try and represent, you know, how it's put together, how it's actually put together in the studio, a little bit live, so people can see the way it's constructed.
Cool. So what do you think the future holds for you? Are you guys thinking of kind of going that kind of pathway of keeping your sound that you've discovered now throughout being Solomon Gray and nicely tying in with the soundtrack side of things?
Yeah.
Do you want to do more of the film and TV side of that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I kind of feel like after writing or doing the record that we've just done, I mean, I kind of feel like flipping it all upside down and then starting again. But that's not because I don't like what we did. It's more, you know, I feel like the album is kind of a soundtrack to something that maybe, I mean, obviously there was some experiences behind it, but it's kind of a soundtrack. It had a lot of that soundtrack idea or way of working behind it. And I kind of feel like seeing whether we can take that on board and maybe like push it even more, you know, beat driven, and how we can make it, because there's a lot of contemplation in the album and a lot of kind of maybe on our first record we had a lot more like drums and heavier stuff, and I'm kind of intrigued at now going, right, okay, let's put that to one side. I know that we've talked about this, but, you know, and seeing how far we can take it the other side of soundtracks and back to where it was before. I mean, you know, who knows? I mean, it's one of those things, an artist talking about that, it's like, probably pretty wanky, but... Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the ideas, I mean...
Yeah, and we've been really lucky with our soundtrack stuff so far that we've really got to be us. You know, we've just said no to projects where people have said, oh, can you do something a bit like this film or that composer? And that's not us. Like, if someone wants what we can bring to the table, then we would like to, you know, hear about the project. And I think we've been really lucky so far to work with people who have embraced that way of working. Yeah. So they want what we do and we bring our thing to it. And I think as long as we can keep doing that, we can carry on kind of marrying the two worlds of being pop recording artists and soundtrack composers at the same time. So fingers crossed that, you know, the luck continues.
Well, thank you so much for the time. And
pleasure.
I'm looking forward to hearing more of you guys.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.